Welcome on back, everybody, to the All Aussie Rules YouTube channel. How are we all going? This is another episode. This is another mid-season review. This time we're looking at the GWS Giants and how they're travelling in season 2024 so far. As always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. And all the interactions help, so I appreciate all of them. Don't forget that the regular podcast still coming out twice a week on Spotify and YouTube. So check me out there. The review episodes come out every Monday, and the preview episodes for each round come out on the Thursday morning. Also available on all my socials: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. There's lots of content over there. TikTok, we do game wraps after each match. Twitter, Instagram, we post teams of the week. We post tips sometimes. We also post power rankings. A lot of content everywhere, so check me out in all of those areas. Without any further ado, let's jump into the GWS Giants and how they're travelling in 2024. So first off, we'll look at how their first 11 rounds have gone. Then we'll have a quick look at the player by player, not every single player, but how their players are going, who the top performers are, anyone that needs to improve. And then we'll jump into what they've got coming up for the rest of the season, who they play, and what we expect from them in the back half of the year. So let's jump right into how they're going. Obviously, round 0 up at home, they hosted Collingwood, and they got the win by 32 points, which is quite comfortable in the end, but Collingwood did waste plenty of opportunities that night, but 18-6 was very accurate kicking, and GWS walked away very strong winners. Round 1, they then hosted North Melbourne, so they didn't have to leave NG Stadium for the first 2 weeks. They then didn't go back to NG Stadium until round 10. But that doesn't matter. They played North Melbourne and they won by 39 points, which isn't outstanding when you look at the fact that North Melbourne haven't won a game yet this year, but they kicked 17-19, so they wasted some opportunities, and North Melbourne kicked a very, very straight that day. Comfortable win, though, for GWS. They then had a trip over to the West to play the West Coast Eagles, and they absolutely smoked them. They won that one by 65 points, never in doubt, really. They then had early season bye. They had the bye a lot earlier than a lot of other teams. And came out of that bye against Gold Coast, who also had the bye the week before, in gather round at Mount Barker. GWS won it by 28 points. They looked a better team most of the day. Gold Coast fought hard, just didn't quite get there. Then Manuka Oval for St Kilda, and this was a weird game. GWS kind of led the whole way, looked comfortable winners all the way through until the last maybe 10 to 15 minutes. St Kilda kicked, I think, 6 or 7 of the last quarter goals. I might have exaggerated. Maybe it was only 5. To get within a kick. Ended up losing by a point, did the Saints. And at this point, GWS are 5-0, and other than the fact that they let their lead slip a bit there, things were cruising. They then had to travel to Melbourne. They played Carlton down there at Marvel Stadium. And it was first quarter, Carlton were leading. Second quarter, GWS looked the better team. And then third and fourth quarter, Carlton kind of looked the better team. Carlton ended up winning by a point. Just to kind of... No, they didn't. It was 19 points. That graphic is wrong. I was going to say, I didn't think they lost by a point. Lost by 19 points. Carlton were the better team in the second half and walked away the winners. Round 7, they hosted Brisbane in Manuka Oval. This was Anzac Day night game, and this is probably their best win of the year. They looked really good this day, and at this point it was like What were they? 6-1. Life was good. They were cruising. They won by 54 points. However, things kind of turned for them the next week. They didn't host. They went to the SCG, played Sydney, lost that by 29 points after looking pretty good in the first quarter. They did have a couple injuries that day, so a couple excuses, but at the end of the day, they lost it by 29. They then went back down to Marvel for the second time in 4 weeks, this time against Essendon, and for the second time in 4 weeks, they lost at Marvel Stadium, this time against the Bombers by 20 points. First quarter, they looked pretty good. Second quarter, kind of evened up a little bit, but GWS was still on top by, I think, 2 goals at half time. The Bombers just looked better in the second half, and GWS didn't really have an answer. And GWS won it by 20. No, Essendon won it by 20, sorry. Oof, what am I saying? They then hosted the Doggies at NG Stadium, and surprisingly, this was their first home loss of the year. They'd obviously won every home match for the first up until this point. Lost it by 27 points in a low-scoring, very inaccurate game. It was wet. It was miserable. They kicked 6-7, but Bulldogs kicked like 8 goals, 22 or something, I think it was from memory. I'm just spitballing here. So the Doggies were clearly the better team. GWS just didn't really have an answer. They only had 2 goal kickers that day. Hogan and Toby Green both kicked 3 each. So at this point, they've gone from winning their first 5 games and 6 of their first 7. All of a sudden, their season kind of fell apart. They'd lost 3 in a row at this point. They'd lost 4 out of 5, and we're in a little bit of a rut and a little bit of pressure on them, really. Last week, they went to the Cattery, who kind of also were struggling for form, but you kind of were worried about GWS, I guess, going into it. Tough game down at the Cattery, having lost 4 out of 5, but they turned it on when it needed to be turned on, and they got the 4 points, winning by 4 points. So it kind of just gave them a little bit of confidence going into the bye. They're sitting not bad position, like they're still above 50%. They're sitting in the top 8 at the moment. They've won 7 out of 11 games, and it's things are okay for them, even though they have had a little bit of a rough period. But they're not the only team that's struggling with that at the moment. Looking at some stats for them this year, first quarters are pretty good. They were 9-2 in the first quarters. Second quarters is probably where they struggle the most, especially over the last 8 weeks. They won the first 3, but since the bye, they've only managed to win 2 second quarters. They are still managing to be 9-2 at half time, though. So suggests that at half time they're looking really good, and they just kind of struggle in the second half, and that's shown on the stat sheet. They've lost their last 4 third quarters and their last 4 fourth quarters, so therefore they've lost their last 4 second halves, and 5 out of their 6 third quarters and 6 out of 7 fourth quarters have they lost. So their second halves are just dropping away, and that is certainly a concern as a football team. Is it they're not running out games? Is it something else? I don't know, but they certainly need to address the fact that their second halves are just not good enough at the moment. The fact that, it's just pretty ordinary, really. They've won 1 second half in 7 weeks, and that was against Brisbane when they smoked Brisbane. Other than that, they lost a lot of second halves. Disposals, early season they dominated possession, not so much over the last maybe month or so, but I mean they're still net positive over the year. Inside 50s, they don't tend to win it overall. If you looked at them after round like 6 or 7, they probably were positive at that point. It's kind of fallen away though the last 4 weeks especially. So the last 4 weeks, minus 25 against Sydney, minus 17 against Essendon, minus 21 against the Bulldogs, and minus 15 against Geelong. So that 4 week period is by far the worst in the AFL. To be minus whatever that is, must be minus 19.5 per game. That's up there with the North Melbournes and the Richmonds of the league, and actually kind of worse than their season averages, which isn't a great sign either. To be honest, they've got a couple things, glaring things that they need to address. I think disposal efficiency is fine. It's usually around about the mark. Forward efficiency, overall, tends to be positive. Certainly compared to their opposition. They last week were outstanding, especially defensive efficiency was very good. Free kick count, they're slightly negative on free kicks. Hit outs, they're slightly negative. Clearances, they're not outstanding. They're -3 per game. Clearances -1 centre clearance per game, -2 stoppage clearances per game. So they're not a clearance team. Clearly, they do have some good players in there, but they don't focus on that. Contested ball overall for the year, they are winning it overall, but once again, their last 7 weeks has not been outstanding. Slightly negative across those 7 weeks. Uncontested ball, they overall are positive in that too, plus 18 per game. Turnover game, they either win it or they lose it quite badly, but even the last 3 weeks where their football probably hasn't been the best, they've still been winning the turnover game most weeks. Tackle game, they're one of the better teams in the league at that. Especially the last couple of weeks, they've really turned it on. They started the season again against Collingwood, they got beaten quite comprehensively, but from that point on, they've been really good in the last 2 weeks. They've been +24 against the Doggies and +20 against Geelong. Obviously, it didn't help them against the Bulldogs, but against Geelong, it was definitely crucial. So, some glaring issues, especially over the last 6 or 7 weeks for the Giants. If they can tidy those things up, they'll certainly be able to get their season back on track. Having a look at some players and how their season is going so far. Best player, I think, convincingly is Tom Green. He's been outstanding, as he usually is. He's very good. You take out the game where he rolled his ankle in the opening minutes, he's been very good in every single game. Sam Taylor, likewise, has been outstanding. He's one of the best key defenders, if not the best key defender in the AFL at the moment. Once again, take out his concussion that happened in the first quarter against St Kilda in round 5. He's been outstanding. Josh Kelly, he came out of the blocks really well. His rounds 2, 3, 4 were really good. He's still playing good football, but maybe not quite as good. Caniglio's been good. Himmelberg's been great as a key backman as well. He gets a lot of the football, more of the football than most key defenders. He's sort of also a general defender in some ways. Nick Haynes has been good as a defender. Lachie Whitfield is either really good or really bad. Not really bad, but just he's good is really good, and then if he gets locked down, he kind of struggles a little bit, which kind of affects their ability to get the run and flow from the back line, which is a crucial part of their game, especially because they're a team that doesn't dominate clearances, so they do rely a bit on their ability to burst from the turnover, and maybe over the last 5 or so weeks has not been outstanding in terms of Lachie Whitfield doing that. Jesse Hogan has been really good at up forward. He's up there in the Coleman. He's had a couple of quiet games, but overall his season's been very, very good. Toby Green's been quiet. He's had, I think it was against the Gold Coast, he was outstanding. He was probably best on that day. Against the Doggies, he kicked 3. He kicked 2 last week, including the winner against Geelong. So he is building, but I guess he's just not reaching the heights that he had maybe last year, where he was outstanding all year long. So that's a look at the Giants. Dave, had quite a few players play this year, especially compared to someone like Sydney. Oh, it's not that many actually. They're only at 29, so they've also had a pretty good run with it. Sydney, I think, are at 27. There's some teams, the Collingwoods, the Richmonds, the Bulldogs, and plenty of others that are really getting high numbers already, just due to the fact that half their team is injured. So they've been pretty lucky in that regard, but they have had a few ins and outs over the last month or so. We'll now have a look at what they've got coming up for the rest of the season. Round 12 at the moment, and they're having the bye. Out of that, they head down to Launceston to play Hawthorn. They then travel back to home for a game against Port Adelaide, and then second week in a row they play at home against Sydney. So 2 big weeks in a row there against current top 4 teams in Port Adelaide and Sydney. They then travel down to Adelaide Oval and play Adelaide. Then they host Carlton, go to the MCG to play Richmond, host the Gold Coast Suns. They then have a big game against the Demons at the MCG, a second game against Hawthorn at Manuka Oval. Then they play Brisbane up at the Gabba, Fremantle at home, and then they finish their season against the Doggies at Mars Stadium in Ballarat. So not the toughest run of all time. Obviously, they've got Port Adelaide, Sydney coming up in the next 3 games, but then outside of that, they really don't play many other top teams. Melbourne in round 20, Carlton round 17, Fremantle round 23. Everyone else is currently outside the top 10. They don't play many of the bottom teams. They obviously had a very good run early in the year where they played Kangaroos, West Coast, and Richmond all pretty early in the year. Did they play Richmond? I can't even remember. No, they haven't played Richmond. But Hawthorn? No, I don't know. Anyway, no, not Hawthorn. I can't even think of who I'm thinking of. They had a reasonably easy run early. So North Melbourne, West Coast is all maybe that I was thinking of. But then they had Gold Coast and Kilda. So they don't get to play North Melbourne and West Coast again, is basically what I was trying to say. The only real team that they play that's low on the ladder going forward is Richmond. Other than that, they play a lot of middle range teams. They got Hawthorn twice. Adelaide, Brisbane, Bulldogs are certainly not an 11th ranked team at their best. That's probably almost a top 4 team at their best. So not the toughest second half of the year. Certainly a lot of winnable games. What can I see them doing? They should probably win at least 6, maybe 7 of them. Where would that sit them on the ladder at the end of the year? It will be enough to play finals. They're on 7 wins, so they should win 6 out of 12, you'd think, as a minimum, which would get them 13 wins, which would, in all likelihood, be enough to play finals. But they would be expecting more than that. They're probably thinking still top 4, even though they've had a bit of a rough run of it lately. They certainly would be looking at the Hawthorn game this week or next game to be a win. They would want to win one of the Port Adelaide or Sydney games, having both at home. 2 tough games, but if they can win one of them, Adelaide at Adelaide Oval will be a cracking game. Should be a very important game. Adelaide probably still clinging on to finals hopes. GWS possibly still clinging on to top 4 if they can have a good 3 weeks heading into that. Carlton at home, they'll probably be hoping that they can get that win. Richmond at the G, they should be winning. Gold Coast at home, they should be winning. Melbourne at the G will be tough for them. Hawthorn at Manuka, they should probably win. Brisbane at the Gabba, depends what Brisbane is playing at that time, but could be a win. Hosting Fremantle should be a win, and the Bulldogs in the last round might be tough for them, but certainly should be getting at least 6 wins from here on in, I would say, which would get them probably around about 5 to 8 on the ladder. is about where I see them, I think. So that's a wrap up of the GWS Giants. How they're going so far this year. Let me know in the comments whereabouts you think they'll finish on the ladder. My thoughts, 5th to 8th, based on what we've seen. But they definitely have a couple things they certainly need to tidy up over the next month of football. So that's everything for GWS. As always, don't forget that there is a regular podcast that comes out on Spotify and YouTube twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. Mondays wrapping up the weekend of football, and the Thursday episode reviewing the coming up weekend of football. Thanks again for joining. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.